Hello, Sin and Space fans. This chapter we have the baby kidnapping content warning. Also, just general sexism. But beyond that, it's pretty clean. Sin and Space Chapter 23. Refuse entertain request this date. Police powers this office extend only to intercolony matters. Fact does not, repeat, not authorize use of police equipment for intercolony affairs. Hamilton Bell, Planetary Affairs, Commissioner. Tony read through the formal message sheet, and then the note attached to it. That's the master's voice up there. The pack radio up in Marsport told me on the side that the old man doesn't believe a word of your story. If the baby really is missing, he figures that Marky Mama did it in. Grim really fixed us. I hope you're taking good care of him. If you get him back in shape, I won't feel so bad about taking a crack at him myself, Harv. The doctor smiled briefly, then asked Tad Campbell, who was waiting to take his answer back to the radio shack. Did Mimi Jonathan see this? No, it just came in. Harv wants to know what answer to send. He scribbled a note. Harv, try this one on the commish. Request use pack facilities to track vicious attacker of our guest Douglas Graham. That ought to get every tin soldier on the planet, and old man Bell himself heading to the parade. Graham as a victim gives him an out, too. He can call it intercolony. Get hot. We need that bloodhound. Tony. When the boy was gone, Tony paced nervously around the living room, started to heat water for coffee, and decided he didn't want it. There was an almost empty bottle of liquor on the floor near the table. Graham's. The doctor reached for it and drew back. It wasn't the right time or the right bottle. He headed for the bedroom door and remembered that Joan's body was still occupying the bed. He peered into the hospital. Graham was still sleeping. Nothing to do but sit and wait and think it out all over again. It checked every time, but it couldn't be right. He hadn't told Anna yet. When you came right down to it, the whole thing was too far-fetched. He wouldn't believe it himself if somebody else had proposed it. But it checked all the way every time. He got up again and hunted through his meager stack of onion-skin volumes and scientific journals. Nothing there, but Joe Gracie ought to know when the search party came back. Maybe they'd find the baby and the kidnapper. Maybe he never would tell, or have to tell anybody his crackpot theory. He decided to make the coffee after all, and wished he hadn't sent Anna and Hank back to stay with Polly, but Gladys had been frantic and frightened when she buzzed him. He couldn't expect the child to handle a hysterical woman by herself. The doctor poured his coffee and drank it slowly, not letting himself go to the intercom. Polly and Hank could help each other now, and worked that way, and Anna was better for them than he would be himself. Somebody had to stay with Graham. He got up and paced restlessly into the hospital room again. The writer stirred and moaned as the door opened, but that was all. It was more than an hour since Tad had left. Why no reply from Harv? Tony went to the front door, opened it, and peered up the street, out over the housetops to the landing field. Nothing in sight. He turned to go back in, and out of the corner of his eye saw them rounding the curve of the street. Gracie, Mimi, Juarez, and then Candro, taking each step reluctantly, his heart back in the hills, while Nick Calantro and Sam Flexner, one on each side, urged him forward. Tony's heart sank. There was no mistaking defeat. I am sure, Mimi said steadily. We heard him cry. Just for a minute. Then it was as if someone had clapped a hand over his mouth. Tony, we can't wait. We've got to go get him out right away. What about the other caves? We tried them all around, Gracie said. 5 or 6 on each side and a couple up above. But every one of those fissures narrows down inside the hill in the same way. We couldn't get through. I don't see how the kidnappers did it either. How about the other side? Tony asked. Someone could go through with a half-track and take a look. We thought of it, Mimi said sharply. Nick got Pitco on the transceiver. Mr. Hackenberg was so sorry. Mr. Reynolds was away, and he didn't have the authority himself to permit us to search on their ground. He was so sorry. Silence, and Tony tried to find a way to say what he had to say. They couldn't just wait, not while he knew something to try. The baby might be all right, but maybe they would get there just 1 minute too late. He turned to Gracie. Joe, what do you know about lethal genes? Huh? The agronomist looked up, dazed, shook his head, and repeated without surprise at the irrelevant question. Lethal genes? He stopped and considered, mentally tabulating his information. Well, they're recessives that... No, I know what they are, Tony stopped him. I thought I heard you say something about them the other day. Didn't you say you thought you hit on some that were viable on Mars? Anna drifted in with Hank at her heels, and they went straight through into the room beyond where Joan still lay. "Oh yes," Gracie said. "Very interesting stuff. Come out to the lab when you have time, and I'll show you. Mimi jumped up. "What are you gabbling about?" she demanded. "This is an emergency. We have to find some way to rescue that baby." "I'm sorry, Mimi." Gracie was bewildered. "What's wrong anyway?" Tony asked a perfectly innocent question, and I answered him when we'd all agreed that we had nothing to do but sit around and wait. Why not use the time? Abruptly, Tony made up his mind. It was up to him now, and to Anna. He got up and called her from the bedroom, led her outside into the street in front of the house, where they were out of earshot of all the others. "Well," she smiled up at him, "will you stop feeling sorry for me and tell me what you're sorry about?" "In a minute. Anna, last night when we took the mask off Sonny, when you fainted, how did it feel?" "I told you." "Yes, you said it was very strong, stronger than you thought a baby could feel. But was it just stronger, or was there something different?" "It's hard to say. I was all worn out and upset. It might have been different, but I don't know how. I'm not even sure it was." She looked at him sharply. "Why?" "It checks," he said to himself. "Listen, Ancy, there's a job to be done. A tough job. A job nobody can do but you. It may hurt you. I don't know. It's a crazy theory I've got. So crazy that I don't even want to explain it to you. But if I'm right, you're the only person who can do it." He stopped. "Anna, did you hear what Joan's last word really was?" "She said brownie." He looked down into frightened dark eyes. "Tony, there aren't any brownies, are there?" "You mean, do I believe there are? No, I don't. But I do think there's something." "You want me to go out there and listen?" "Yes, but that's only part of it. I wouldn't let you go alone. If you do go, I'll be with you, if that helps any. But I want to go into the cave where they heard the baby and see what we can find." "No!" The cry was torn from her. "I didn't mean that," she cut herself. "It's just... Oh, Tony, I'm afraid." "We've got to find out, Nancy. We've got to find out." "The bloodhound?" she asked desperately. "Can't you track them down with the bloodhound?" "Bill hasn't answered us. How long can we wait?" She stood silent for a moment, then turned her face up to his, serenely quiet now and trusting. "All right," she said at last. "All right, Tony. If you say it has to be done." "I'll be there with you," he promised. Mimi and Joe didn't understand, and Tony didn't try to explain. He simply repeated that he had an idea. He wanted to go out with Anna to the cave where the baby's cry had been heard. He left careful instructions about the care of Graham, if he should awake, and about Hank, Polly, and Jim, all three of whom were too upset to be left to themselves. A 10-minute ride on the half-track, and they were within the shadow of the rim rocks. The drifting stench of Pidco's refineries on the other side began to reach them. Then the ground was too rocky to go on. Tony stopped the machine, and they got out. Farther up the face of the nearest hill, they could make out the figures of the 5 who had remained on guard. One of them came running. Flexner, the chemist. "They said on the transceiver you were coming," he told Anna and Tony. "What's your idea? We're going nuts sitting around waiting. Ted thought he heard Sonny cry again, but nobody else did." "I just wanted to see if I could turn up anything," Tony told him. "We're going into the cave." Together they walked out of the sunlight into the 7-foot opening in the hard rock. One of the guards would have preceded them, but Anna firmly refused. A chalk marked along the wall, drawn by the others when they left the cave, was guide enough. They followed the white line in and down some 50 meters, then 50 more along a narrowing left-hand branch, and then 100 meters, left again and narrowing to another fork. Both the branches were too small for an adult to squeeze through. The chalk line pointed into the right-hand cranny. That was as far as they could go. They stood at the narrow opening, listening. There was nothing to hear, no sound at all, in the rock-walled stillness except their own breathing and the tiny rustling of their hands along rough alien stone. They waited, Tony's eyes fixed on Anna's face. He tried to silence his thoughts as he could his voice, but doubts tore at him. He turned, finally, to the one certainty he knew, and concentrated on Anna and her alone, on his love for her love for him. "I hear something," she whispered at last. "Fear, mostly fear, but eagerness, too. They are not afraid of us. I think they like us. They're afraid of... it's not clear. Of people?" She fell silent again, listening. "People." She nodded her head emphatically. "They want to talk to us, Tony, but... I don't know." Her brow furrowed in concentration, and she sat down suddenly on the hard rock floor as though the physical exertion of standing were more than she could bear. Tony, go and tell the guards to go away, she said at last. No, he said firmly. Go ahead, please, hurry. They're trying... Abruptly, she stopped concentrating on the distance. You spoiled it, she said bitterly. You frightened them. How? You didn't trust them. You thought they'd hurt me. Nancy, how can we trust them? How can I leave you here alone and send the guards away? Don't you see I can't take that risk? You made me come here, she said tiredly. You said I was the one who could do the job. I'm trying to do it. Please go now and tell the guards to leave. Tell them to get out of range, down at the bottom of the hill, maybe as far away as the half-track. Please, Tony, do as I say. All right. But he was still hesitant. Anna, who are they? The bitterness left her face. Brownies, she said. But that's not... I'm sorry, I don't mean to feel angry and frustrated. What does the word mean? They're different. Like Sonny? Not exactly. She made a small, useless gesture with her hands. More distinct. No, maybe you're right. I think they're like him, only older. How many are there? Quite a few. Too many for me to count. One of them is doing all the talking. Talking? Yes, that was part of what had bothered him. Nancy, how can you understand them so clearly? You told me you can't do that. You didn't know what Graham was angry about. How do you know what they're afraid of? Tony, I don't know. I can understand, that's all. And I'm sure it's right. And I know they're not tricking us. Now please, please go and tell the guards. He went.